Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan.
Welcome to Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the current political situation, what it means for us. This is a special edition of Consider This. Over the next 90 minutes, we will be speaking to activists and experts to make some sense of the recent political developments. Now, in particular, we're hoping to look at the country's reform agenda, what will happen to the progress made so far, and how do we ensure it continues to progress amid the political uncertainty. So stay tuned. We're going to be joined on the show by activist Hisham Rais, political analyst Dr. Sharifah Shahira, and Professor William Case, among the many others on the show as well. But first up, we have joining us in the studio, Thomas Fann, chairperson of Bersih 2.0. Welcome to the show, Thomas.
Thank you very much.
Good to have you here. Now, I'd like to begin with first understanding how Bersih characterizes this crisis. Now, is this to be expected of democratic politics, especially coalition politics? Because, you know, it seems almost natural that coalitions come together, they fall apart, then they realign. I mean, isn't all of this par for the course of a vibrant parliamentary democracy?
Yes, I think we issued a statement yesterday and we made it very clear where we stand on this, what we term a backdoor government. To us, it's a betrayal. And I explained to you why. Not because it is illegal or not allowed in our law. It is allowed, yeah? But I think it's a betrayal simply because when the coalition went before the public, the voters at G14, they went before them presenting a set of manifesto. I'm not just talking about Pakatan Harapan, but Barisan Nasional and others as well. And based on what they presented, and the people made their choice, and they decided to give Pakatan Harapan a 5-year mandate to carry out their promises. And now we are not even 2 years, and apparently that government has collapsed for now.
But I want to ask you, Thomas, you know, even the expression "the people" needs to be disaggregated. There were many people who voted for Pakatan Harapan or the component parties of it, but there were also many people who voted for UMNO, voted for Barisan Nasional, voted for GPS, right, with very different visions of the country.
Right.
Now, if the basis, the glue that brought Pakatan disintegrated, not because of voters, but because of shifting alliances, isn't it legitimate and reasonable for new alliances to form? And is that what we're seeing now?
Okay, if there's a new reconfiguration, I like to use the word reconfiguration of the component parties, which means that the character of the alliance, the coalition has changed, and we should nullify whatever manifesto they put before the Rakyat at G14. So the right thing to do for us, if there's going to be such a reconfiguration, is go back to the Rakyat, ask for a fresh mandate based on your new manifesto. That's the right thing to do.
Is this what happens in advanced democracies, Thomas, especially in democracies that, you know, have coalition politics, have coalition governments? Is it expected that every time the coalition realigns or reconfigures, as to use your term, that you have to go back to the polls and get a fresh mandate?
I wouldn't use the word have to, but it is done. So if you look at the UK, for example, just over the last few years, I lost count of how many snap elections they had. You know, and for reasons very much that because they needed a fresh mandate to push forward Brexit or whatever, a new prime minister come in even from the same party, and they feel that they needed a fresh mandate. They go back to the people. I think this is a way they honor the voters, not what we are seeing here, backroom dealings in posh hotels. I mean, this is really selling out the voters. I'm not just talking about PH.
Yeah, look, I wonder if part of the anxiety, especially from the community of activists and people who put a lot of effort into thinking about, probably the only people who actually read the manifesto, you know, is the idea that we're transiting from an authoritarian system to a democratic one. That in fact some of the pieces aren't in place yet.
The growing pains, right?
Growing pains. The necessary institutional reforms are not, and therefore the anxiety that this moment for real change is going to be lost. Is that what's animating the anxiety?
Right. I think, you know, I have to stress here that civil society organization like us, Bersih, Our only concern is the reform agenda that is encapsulated in the Buku Harapan, the manifesto. Now, how it got into that wasn't by accident. It was through years of campaigning, pushing for it, that the Pakatan Harapan, Pakatan Rakyat opposition then put it into the manifesto. So for us, the preservation of that reform agenda is all important. That's why it's a great tragedy if we lose it.
I want to ask you very quickly before we move into the future of the reform agenda. What's happened currently, Thomas? What's your assessment of the conduct of our institutions in the past couple of days, in particular that of the role of the Agong?
I think at this moment of crisis, I think we are thankful that we have an Agong that is careful, wants to consider exactly what is the situation of the parties, and obviously the people who triggered this collapse and thought they had the numbers, to come forward. But obviously by now we know that they don't have the numbers. It doesn't tally up, and that's why the Agong is going through. And I think we're thankful that he's handling this, but it shouldn't really come to this in the first place.
What about the other institutions? In many underdeveloped countries, third world countries, you would see in a power crisis, a vacuum would be filled by the military coming out of the barracks. You'd see maybe even the police or other institutions jostling for power. The fact that it's relative calm, no strife, no violence, does that make you
confident
that there's something right going on in Malaysia?
I feel lucky, like most Malaysians, that we never have a history of the military, or any armed forces getting involved with our politics. And I think that's something that we are grateful for. But I think we want to allow time also for the existing law. And the other important institution that you didn't mention is Parliament. Parliament has a role to play in determining who is the government, who has the majority vote. And the sitting is 2 weeks away from now. I think if it cannot be resolved, it's either you go for a fresh election or you wait for Parliament to open and then call for a vote of confidence against this current government. If it wins the vote, then it continues.
I mean, at the moment, the only other political configuration calling for a vote is, in fact, those associated with the former Barisan Nasional. So the Post-Pakatan Nasional, or parties associated with it, are now saying, if we can't form a government of national unity, that was their proposal, minus the DAP, is that how they put it, then we should have fresh elections. But is that a fair demand to make with the numbers they have?
Of course, we have said if you can't form a government, then go for fresh election. But if PH managed to prove that they have the numbers, okay, and they already received the mandate from the people at the last election, then things should continue as before. But how are they getting the new numbers? I think that is an important question that we like to know as well. But right now, everything is quite speculative.
Yeah, so this new numbers. So the new numbers might come from parties in Sabah and Sarawak that were not part of the original pack, but will provide them the numbers. Now, what would be a deal breaker for Bersih? What would be unacceptable in the new configuration?
What would be unacceptable is that, number one, the manifesto is nullified. In other words, if they come forward and say, since now we have new partners, what we promised you earlier in the manifesto doesn't count anymore. That will be totally unacceptable for us. What would be unacceptable also if they take in people who have been charged with corruption, known to be corrupt, into the coalition, to be part of government. I think that would be also unacceptable to us.
And should that happen, what would Bersih's position be?
Well, I mean, we will eventually, if they don't take heed, I think the people want to respond. And as always, Bersih take the lead in organizing mass protests, basically to make known our displeasure with what's happening.
What do you think could be the other possible scenarios coming out of the current situation? We have now the Agong meeting with the MPs. He's asked them very simple questions of who do you support or would you support a dissolution? Tun seems to have support from a broad range of political parties. But, what is it that you think could happen that is unanticipated?
He could receive the broad base of support from both sides. But whether he could put the parties that supported him together in the same cabinet, same bed, that is also another question, because they may not like each other. Like I think UMNO, PAS and MCA has made it known they wouldn't work with DAP. So I think they are out of the question equation. So if they receive support from PAS, Tun receives support from PAS, then he can appoint them into the cabinet, and then he wouldn't have enough numbers anyway.
I just want to come back to the possibility of fresh elections. Should there be elections called, I'm wondering whether that would be wise in the absence of completed reforms to our electoral process, to our electoral system. Is it wise to argue for polls at this stage?
Well, there's still a lot of problem with our election system. Number one would be the issue of malapportionment and gerrymandering, which is not only there, but has gotten worse, And so going into an election is not ideal, but short of having no government or a government that could not function, I think the lesser of the two evils is actually to go for a snap election.
Well, what about this other scenario? Let's say that a non-ideal coalition by Bersih standards comes, says they want to form the government,
a unity
right?
government.
They put aside most part of the manifesto, but they do say, we will go ahead with electoral reform. That would be the one thing that we promised to complete before the next general election. Would you agree to that?
You mean they just please our area of electoral reform?
Yes, it's a hypothetical, you realize
and you expect us, Bersih, to abandon our other, NGOs and friends who campaign for other areas? No way. It's a whole thing or nothing.
Well, okay, we're going to take a pause. Thomas, come back to this conversation because I think there's so much more to unpack here. But we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more on Consider This, so don't you go anywhere.